Hello, and welcome to Yogahub podcast, where we bring you conversations with some of the world's leading yoga and movement educators. In this episode, I'm chatting to Jim Harrington. Jim has been teaching yoga for the past 30 years. A surfer in his younger days, and still to today, he spent a lot of time traveling around the world, including Southeast Asia and India. And during this time, he became more interested in yoga and meditation before eventually learning to teach. He ended up in South Africa, where he opened one of the first yoga studios there and has been running teacher training programs for the past 20 years. He's particularly well known for his Yoga for Athletes program, where he utilizes the practice of yoga to help people work with athletic performance and also recovery. We're very lucky to have Jim visiting us in October here at Yogahub Dublin, where he's going to be running some of his Yoga for Athletes programs. It should be a really wonderful weekend to learn a little bit more about that. So thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to listen. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Jim. Okay, cool. So Jim, thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to come on and have this conversation. I'm really looking forward to chatting to you and getting to pick your brains a little bit about a couple of things. First of all, how are you doing today?
Yeah, very well, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, not at all. Yeah. So I think it'd be nice to begin, just for anyone who maybe isn't too familiar with your work at this moment in time, if you want to take a few moments to tell us a little bit about your background, maybe what you did before you got into yoga, your career in yoga so far. Yeah, and as much or as little detail as you'd like to share. It'd be nice to hear.
Well, it's a long story. Around 10 years ago, let me start there. Around 11 years ago, I found myself with the Indian cricket team. So I was the yoga coach, part of their support team. And this is in my book, actually. I wrote a book about yoga for sports after that. And so the TV reporters all lined up in front of me with cameras on me. I was kind of shaking in my boots. And the first question they wanted to know was, why is an Australian teaching the Indian players how to do yoga? Surely we've got enough yoga teachers in India. And I said, well, fair question, yeah. And then I had to try and, well, first of all, I was quite diplomatic and respectful. And I said, I learned yoga in India back a long time ago, and I have complete high regard for the masters of yoga in India, and it's also its cultural tradition and heritage. But what I needed to try and convey was to say, most of that yoga is yoga, for yoga's sake. Doesn't necessarily translate into good performance on a field. So what I could bring was a greater level of sort of detail and understanding of the human body from a more modern Western perspective, like a physio perspective. So I was able to sort of understand what yoga could bring, things like breathing and body alignment and, mental aspects of sports performance. And I was also able to work really well with the physiotherapist and try and keep the players from getting injured. So it was difficult to explain that to these reporters, and I was kind of really put on the spot. Then my friend, my colleague sort of stepped in and he said, Paddy, he was like the assistant coach, stepped in and said, listen, we want to do everything we possibly can here to win this next World Cup. And if it means hiring an Australian yoga expert, then we'll do that. And so, yeah, I guess, how did I get to be there? Well, as I said, I learned yoga in India back in the 90s. I spent about 6 months wandering around, mainly in the Himalaya. And so learned from sadhus, some of them, and also from an amazing Iyengar yoga teacher and another incredible teacher, Clive Sheridan, who's an inspirational old British yogi. And yeah, before that, I had been practicing already for quite a while, maybe sort of 7-8 years, and I'd just been mainly practicing myself. I was you could say, in the beginning, self-taught. Came from a book. A friend gave me a photocopied book that he'd bought in India with the 12 basic postures and sun salutations, and I just started doing them. So the body was quite young and mobile at that time, and I just kind of kept going. And gradually, I had a lot of curiosity. I think I'm generally a very curious person. I'm still curious, and I think it's a good attribute to keep exploring new things. So yeah, I was curious about cultures. I spent about 3 years non-stop moving around in Southeast Asia, including China. I learned to speak Mandarin when I lived in Taiwan. And I was based in Taiwan because I could, at that time, earn pretty good money teaching English. And then I just kind of save my money and go surfing, spend it slowly in Philippines and Indonesia, which at that time were kind of unexplored regions in the field of surf. And there was some incredible, amazing world surf spots being discovered. And, we were in our early 20s, myself and some friends, and it was like, well, it's a no-brainer, for the cost of an air ticket, we can be over there. We might discover the next big thing in surfing. Not that it was, not because we wanted any kind of fame, but to surf by yourself in a tropical paradise where the living's cheap and it's warm water and it's all yours. I grew up surfing Cronulla, which is a really crowded place. It's kind of like a bit like Dogtown of Sydney, really. So that was the mission for a few years, was sort of hunting new surf frontiers. And I'm really glad I did that. It was amazing, from the perspective of just opening the mind to different cultures, to sort of the ability to deal with uncertainty when you're moving and traveling and living in places where, you might get stuck by a typhoon, or I've seen volcanoes go off. I've had earthquakes. I've been stuck behind trapped by a typhoon, all sorts of adventures. I think I've got a bit of my Irish friend the other day was saying, Jim, you've got an adventurous spirit, so you've got to keep going with that. So now I'm in my middle age, but I still like to get out there. So I'm still surfing, still run on the mountain, still do some rock climbing. And once a year I take a hike in the Himalayas. These days I bring a group with me. We do yoga and meditation and walk in the Himalayas. And I've been doing a lot of retreats in nature where I invite people to come out of the city and explore the practices of meditation and yoga, but also to connect with nature. So I've got one organized in Wicklow near Dublin. So that's a little punt from my retreat in just after our weekend, which will be the 9th, 10th, right? The 9th, 10th, I think. And so, yeah, that's maybe a bit about my background. I guess I learned yoga prior to the sort of current mainstreaming of yoga. And so when I came to South Africa, I moved to South Africa. I was married to a South African lady, and we kind of arrived here, and I actually didn't really know what I was going to do, but started teaching a few classes. And when you sort of show up and you're the one who knows more than everybody else, then because yoga hadn't really reached Cape Town, South Africa at that time, and so I was in a fortunate position, and I made good friends and good connections, and gradually it just became the thing that I do. And then in the early 2000s, I started with a teacher training program. I was the first Yoga Alliance accredited person in the country. And yeah, that went really well. And I've just been working with that, and it's been an amazing way to sort of stay curious and stay on the edge of learning, because, you know, as you probably know, when you start teaching in depth, especially things like teaching methodology and teaching anatomy, physiology, your students will keep asking questions. And so then I have to keep answering questions. And so it's been an amazing journey for me to sort of have that as my main work over these last 20 years. And and then the yoga for sports actually kind of grew out of the teacher training, because I figured that it was such a valuable niche that as yoga started getting more popular, we hadn't really reached the sports people. So I started teaching a yoga for runners workshop about 12 years ago, I guess. And so if you're talking to, say, a runner, especially if it's a person who's pretty obsessive with their running, which a lot of them are, they're not really interested in yoga. But if you can present it to them and say, okay, this is going to help you to run faster, because that's what it does, actually, then that's a hook, if you like, for, hook sounds a bit manipulative, but a reason for them to try it and to get into it. Without the reason, they probably won't. So my yoga for sports came out of a little module. So I made a short module for my advanced training, where I was aiming at yoga teachers who wanted to work more with sports people, but at the same time, sports people who were interested in yoga, and also coaches and therapists who, by this time, 10 years ago, they had heard about yoga. They sort of knew that it had benefits, but they weren't really sure how to go about it. Still the case. And so, yeah, so it's a fascinating, that's been another fascinating area for me to work into, because then the question is, okay, if I'm going to present yoga to you and you're a surfer, that's going to be different if I present it to this other person who's a cyclist, right? So then you have to apply your thinking mind and go, okay, what does this particular body need? What does this body need? What does this psychology need? And what does this psychology need? And they're not the same. So it's opened up a big space of exploration, and I've learned a lot actually by working with all sorts of sports people over the last 10 years. Things that I never thought I would ever explore, like, golf and tennis and horse riding and everything. The only one I haven't done is darts and snooker.
There you go. That's the next market. I imagine snooker. There's going to be a lot of crossover between yoga and snooker.
I think so.
In terms of posture and the shoulder positioning and
back
it
leg,
could be an interesting one.
Yeah, I like a good game of snooker too.
There you go.
Yeah.
I want to touch back on something you mentioned earlier. So you said your first kind of exposure to yoga was through this book that you were given, this photocopied book. And when you first started practicing, were you drawn to it immediately, or was it something that you kind of, stuck at and just kept exploring, or was there something that kind of grabbed you about the practice that, like, you were like, okay, this is something I'm very much interested in?
Yeah, interesting question. My friend said, here, just do these postures in the morning, you'll feel amazing. And I think he also said it kind of fixes your hangover. At the time we were students, and we were, boozing and whatever. But I think I was, I played sports. I played Aussie rules football, which was a really very physical game. It's related to Gaelic football, actually. And you know, in this, when you're training in sports, that you, as a team, you'll stretch. I somehow liked the stretching. You know, a lot of the guys, they hated the stretching. You know, they'll do anything not to do the stretching. But somehow, I don't know why, my body enjoyed it and I liked it. So my early kind of space of practicing this yoga from a book, I would put down a blanket on the floor and I'd go, okay, I'm going to go through the postures and do them, and I just kind of feel into it, and it was a space to. But what yoga is supposed to be is just bringing your awareness into your body, and part of that is stretching. It might be more than just stretching. Part of it's breathing, and it made me feel really calm and settled and centered. And then after doing it for a little while, I started to miss it. So it kind of caught me very early. You know, if I missed my practice for a few days, I'd think, I feel like, you know, the body feels like it needs something here. Oh, yes, I need to do my practice. So it caught me quite early, I would say. And I've had people ask me, was it difficult for you to start doing a self-practice? And I said, it wasn't difficult because I started there. You know, there was only self-practice, you know.
Do you remember what the 12 postures were?
Yeah, it was the Shivananda sequence. I don't know if I get the order right now, but it was 12. You had to do 12 Surya Namaskars. That's the Indian style Surya Namaskar. Then headstand. Then you start with headstand. Then shoulder stand. Plow, and then it went into now I can't remember the order, but it was fish, the backward facing fish, and a couple of standing postures at the end. And from that, I think in my practice, I started to then explore and get a bit more creative. It was kind of like a natural evolution. Oh, maybe I'll do this posture here because it seems to fit. But ultimately, I think it's not ideal to practice from a book. I would say that. And there's a lot of technique and there's a lot of ways you can actually injure yourself. And I remember my mother saying at one point, you know, maybe you'll overstretch yourself. I was like, rubbish. No, that can't happen. Of course, mothers do.
I can only imagine if I was in my teenage years trying to practice yoga out of a book and going straight up into a headstand, I probably would have done myself a mischief at some point.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, my back. I think I did some serious stuff with my lower back. So later on, I did manage to have a lot of back pain, but figured it out. Came through it. You know, now I'm feeling amazing. My body's strong, and it's been I've had injuries. I've had lots of stuff. I've had shoulder dislocations, not from yoga, but surfing and other activities. But the yoga has always, for me, been, maybe not always. There was a time when I practiced Ashtanga yoga very strong, very hard. And that was incredible as well. As a sort of 10, 15 years, I went down that route, and I taught Mysore as well. But I kind of moved away from that to something a little bit more, how should we say, more balancing for the body. So for me, very much, I think it's about tuning and balancing the tension in the body. And when you get it right, it's like having an instrument that's well tuned. You know, it plays. So I think Mr. Iyengar said that. And so yeah, so far so good. I use the yoga to come back into balance, so that if I go surfing too much, like a few weeks ago, surfed some big waves and got proper heavy wipeout, and I actually needed to go to my friend, the osteopath there. I never usually do that, but had to be kind of clicked back into place and sorted out. But the yoga does that for me. It kind of rebalances things, puts me back in a good space, physically, mentally, so that I can then, I feel like then I can take on more challenge in the world in some ways because I've got that anchor practice. That's the way I see it. So,
and I know I've quite a good few friends who are surfers and also yoga practitioners and yoga teachers, and there does seem to be a big crossover between the two. And so I'd be curious, what is it that you enjoy about surfing so much, and how do you feel there is the crossover between the two?
Yeah, I think, okay, this is super interesting. You know, there's a few places. I think the key and important thing with practicing yoga is about being present. So if you do a good yoga practice, your mind isn't elsewhere. Your mind's fully 100% here and now with what you're doing. With surfing, you also get that, like, very easily. You have to be there. So when you're taking off on a wave, for example, particularly if it's big or critical or hollow or tricky in some way, it's not like you have to try and focus. The focus happens because it has to happen. It's also with any other extreme sport. So you can think of rock climbing, especially gravity sports, though, like skiing. So this brings you to a place called flow state, which a lot of people have spoken about flow state, but I feel like that's the linkage, because flow state happens with a certain set of parameters or conditions, and one of them is you have to be challenged. So if you're doing something that's too easy, it doesn't work. If you're doing something too difficult, it doesn't work. So you find that sort of edge or sweet spot that makes you focus. The other is it has to be something you take pleasure in. And there's something about moving, sliding. People love sliding. You know, you take children to a snow field and they just want to slide, right? I don't know what it is. It's something in us that, like, to get to move without your own effort just has this attraction. You know, it's like sweet, right? So people like to ski or go on a boat or even skateboard or any kind of. And then there's something else which I find interesting, and I haven't really figured out what the mechanism, why we delight in it, but there's something about the G-force. You know, like if you ride a motorcycle or a bicycle, you want to, like, people tend to want to take that corner hard, right? Because they feel something pulling. So there's also that in surfing, which you don't really get in yoga, but you do get balance. And I'm a big fan of balancing. So this past weekend, I taught a whole 4-hour workshop on balancing. And interesting thing is, so balancing tends to get you to flow towards flow state if you set up the conditions right, you know. That's one thing. The other is perhaps sort of, if you look at the culture of surfing, within surfing there's longboarding and there's shortboarding, and as I grew up in surfing, it was a little bit like it was also not quite mainstream in the 80s, 90s. It was a bit kind of punk influenced, a bit sort of anarchistic, and the culture is to just try and get radical. So, you know, you want to be in the most critical wave, in the most critical part of the wave. You want to get in the tube is ideal. And so there's that sort of thrill-seeking element, which isn't for everybody and doesn't have to be for everybody. And but yeah, it's part of surfing as a sport, which you don't necessarily get in other sports, except at the sort of high end. So, for example, in cricket's a pretty dry and doesn't seem to be the most exciting sport. But if you're the batsman and you've got someone hurling a ball at you at 150 kilometers an hour and it's a hard ball, that's kind of exciting, right? That's pretty extreme. If you've ever been in that position, which I'm not a cricketer, but no, there's an element of fear. And so that brings me to maybe one other aspect of yoga and surfing, or yoga and sport as well, is that you can develop this equanimity, develop a cool mind or calm mind. And that's an important part of yoga as well. So you can't panic if you're surfing. You mustn't panic, in any sport, really. Yeah, I can talk long on surfing, yeah.
Yeah. I also find balancing absolutely fascinating. And
Yes.
I would love to do a 4-hour workshop on balance. That sounds amazing. And I'm not sure if you've ever seen it's on YouTube. It's a short documentary called Slow Mo, and it's about this guy in California who, I think he was like a big time lawyer, wealthy, had the family, the house, all that sort of stuff, and he just wasn't happy. And what he discovered was roller skating, but this very specific type of roller skating where basically he would be moving but just standing on one foot, so almost in a bit of like a kind of a Warrior 3 dancers pose kind of hybrid on the skates, and he would move slowly. So that was his thing, is he wanted to move slowly and smoothly, and to try and go for as long as he could just on one leg.
Interesting.
And he said that that's what helped him find this like flow state. I think he ended up like quitting his job and all this sort of stuff, and now he just rollerblades all day long, but in this very specific style. And one of the things they were saying in the documentary, which always kind of stood out to me, is they kind of showed this graph of like that when you're balancing, there's almost this direct connection between your inner ear and like the center of the earth. You know what I mean? You have this sort of like really intimate connection between you and the planet. So it's so fascinating, and I've been reading a lot recently about the links between like balance and coordination and emotional regulation. That this vestibular system that's involved in balance is now thought to be involved in so much more than just physical balance, and there's a link between almost emotional balance and these kind of things. So, balancing as an act is so interesting. But I also hadn't really thought about the sliding thing, because there is something really enjoyable about sliding. I guess maybe there's that kind of play between you're in control, but you also have to give up a certain level of control to a certain degree, that there's something interesting in that as well. But yeah, balancing is very interesting.
Very interesting. Balancing, I found something recently, a couple of years ago. I think it came from Porges, maybe. So there's a chemical in the brain called BDNF. They call it a factor. And this chemical in the brain is enhanced by balance, by any kind of balancing activity. This scientists were studying aging and age-related cognitive decline, and they found that this substance called BDNF, it's brain-derived neurotropic factor, is a stimulus to new learning. Stimulus to new learning at the sort of level of your neurons. If there's a higher level of BDNF in the mix, more new neural connections happen. So therefore, they were talking about learning language or movement of some sort. If you include a balance in your life, you keep your levels of this sort of, basically it's that substance that's enhancing neuroplasticity. And initially they discovered this by researching old people. But that was good to know. So I think I hadn't heard about it being related to emotional regulation, but that's very interesting. It kind of makes, I often look back and think of, I'm curious about this human organism that we are on all levels, physical, mental, spatial, movement-wise. And I like to sort of, because I think I spent time in Papua New Guinea and these sort of rural communities in Asia and around the world, also in Africa. And I apply it back to what would the evolutionary basis of this be, or how would this sort of look in a traditional society where we didn't live in cities and sit on chairs and drive cars and so on. And that's kind of almost one of the lenses that I look at things through. And if you think about it, being able to balance is essential for life. If you're out in the mountains, say, for example, or hunting and gathering, it's a big part of being human, right? Yeah. So, yeah.
I guess one of the things that makes us unique in terms of evolution and stuff is that we're bipedal, stand on two legs.
Yeah.
And I guess that sort of introduces a whole new element of balance, that if you're on four legs and closer to the ground, obviously animals are, I'm sure, display incredible feats of balance as well. But it is one of the things that makes us slightly unique as organisms, that we have this different aspect of balance that other creatures don't have.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you see, a friend of mine's young daughter started to walk recently, and they captured her first steps on a camera. It was amazing. She was up on her feet, and they were all going, "Yeah!" And she was smiling, and then she kind of went, "Oh!" It's like for a moment she was just terrified. She's like, "What am I doing up here?" And she almost fell down, and then she kind of stayed up, and then. When we first figured out how to get up on 2 feet, we're tall, we're high, and there's a fall involved as well if you fall. But I do speaking of workshops, I do one of my sort of workshop packages that I like to do is, it's kind of about primal movement, but I start from the beginning and I say, okay, what if you're a single cell organism and a fish and a lizard and a quadruped and a running quadruped, and I kind of build this whole thing from I do that because I want people to understand how the spine moves or can move, and how the shoulders and legs and so on move. And what I figured out is, if you think about what is the sort of the key superpower of humans, besides our intellect in the physical form, it's throwing and kicking. So we have if you think about it, if you throw, that's a diagonal movement, which we've given up the crawling pattern, but it's almost like we're kind of applying some of the crawling pattern into a throwing pattern. And there aren't really, maybe monkeys can throw, but there's no other animal that's really adapted as a throwing creature. And then, most of our sports are either kicking or throwing with running and so on. Anyway, so that for me informs how we do yoga. That's why I'm throwing it into this talk, because the body moves in these spiral and diagonal lines, as well as on the straight planes. But a lot of the way that sort of yoga has found its expression in the modern day came from books. I think that's where it came from, books or videos, which are 2D. But the body doesn't work really 2D. We're a 3D moving organism. And so fortunately for me, I think my yoga was informed by a lot of different angles, including from a Chinese Kung Fu Tai Chi angle. And so I like to do a lot of circular movement. And the joints of the body, they respond well like that. And so a lot of, I'll sort of draw on different elements of different traditions, maybe not sort of your traditional yoga, although I know traditional yoga well as well. But in a sense, sort of use what I think is most appropriate for the individual person or the situation. Yeah. I'm
sure you've heard of it before, but the theory that throwing is what led to the development of or that throwing was one of the big leaps in human development, that I think we're the only animal that can throw overhand. Monkeys can throw, but they can only throw underhand.
Okay.
So throwing overhand you've a lot more accuracy.
Yes.
And the theory is that if you have one human throwing stones at you, okay, it's not pleasant, but it's not a disaster. If you have 20 humans throwing stones, that's a whole different game. You know what I mean? So the theory is that when we started to realize the utility of throwing, this sort of encouraged the development of cooperation and language and strategy and all this sort of stuff, which led to the development of more complex societies and cultures. And I think as recently as the 1800s or something like that, when the Spanish went to take over the Canary Islands, the native Canary Islanders fought off the Spanish Armada just by throwing stones. They had good vantage points up high. And, if you got a good throw, these guys were coming with muskets and stuff, and they had to just run away.
Yeah. I haven't heard that, but that sounds amazing. I like that.
Yeah. Plausible. And so to touch back on the yoga for athletes, because you're saying that with your approach, you sort of draw on slightly different traditions and maybe slightly different ways of working with the body. So I'd be curious to know, I guess, one, why you think the practice of yoga is so complementary for athletes, and then on the maybe flip side, or not even flip side of it, but what sort of changes might need to be made to make yoga very useful for athletes. I think it's interesting that traditionally yoga being a practice that was kind of intended for stillness, how that sort of relates to then using the practice for more movement-based things.
Yeah, I think yoga was always, in a way, a complement for life, to help a person to remain healthy and well and functional. So it's always been good for health. But yeah, this question of stillness is interesting. It makes me think of a conversation I had with one of the Indian players, a young guy who was a fast bowler. He was like, "No, Jim, fast bowlers shouldn't meditate." I was like, "What do you mean?" It's like, "No, fast bowler needs to be angry. Too much meditation will make him too calm and quiet." I'm like, okay, yeah, interesting, fair point. But so I tried to say, well, what if you could get yourself to such a focused state that you channel all that energy of anger in yourself and then funnel it into the funnel. So there is this stillness and calm and peacefulness as well, but also just kind of mental application and discipline as well. It's a broad, yoga is very broad. I just want to say it's got so much in it. And so different elements can affect a person's sports performance. Neuroplasticity is one we just mentioned. So the ability to stay adaptable. I would say breathing control is a huge element. So you can always work with breathing and improve the depth of someone's breathing or the speed and control of the breathing. There's a huge field of pranayama to work with there. And at yogahub, I'm planning to do a workshop on breathing as well. Keeping the body balanced, and when I say balanced, I mean any particular sport that you train and put in a lot of hours, it will pull you out of natural balance in some way or other, So yoga tends to bring a little bit back towards ideal balance. So that's a factor in overuse injuries. So keeping things well pliable and mobile, you get injured less, you stiffen up less. And a big one is recovery. So this is, I think, where it's underutilized underutilized, underexplored. When we do, say, inverted postures, simple inversions like legs up the wall, when we have a good stretch, especially things like shoulder stand and plow, we're toning down our nervous system. We're able to sort of sink into a very parasympathetic nervous system state. And your body's recovery rate increases significantly if you can do that. So most elite athletes or people who work out and train hard, what I've seen is a lot of them they're kind of exhausting themselves. And this is what training is. You're supposed to work hard, and that's how you build more strength and speed and so on. But they exhaust themselves and then they sleep and do it again the next day. So if you're able to somehow improve the speed of recovery, that means you can train again you don't have to wait 24 hours to train again. You can go 16 hours and train again. So therefore, this is a very quick way, a very important aspect of yoga for sports is the enhancing recovery. And people are talking about ice baths and saunas and this and that and socks and so on. Also, everyone's looking for an edge to improve the recovery. And that's been my experience with surfing, is I've got a little recovery routine that I teach the surfers. And you do this little recovery routine in 30 minutes and you're ready to go in the water again. So it can apply to almost any sport. Another thing I would say is I think yoga, the question arises, is yoga enough to make you fit? And people sometimes ask, so I don't think it's enough to make you fit to run a marathon, say, for example. Obviously, if you need to be fit for something in particular, you've got to train that. But what it does do is gives you like a base level of bodily fitness and awareness, and especially mobility and postural strength, so your body posture can hold itself well. And so those things, that base level, means you can apply it to anything else. That's what I've found. And yeah. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
yeah, no, for sure. And I think the recovery thing is a very interesting point. And I think even if you look at that outside of even athletes, I'd say that's an issue for a lot of people in the modern world, is that we don't give ourselves the time, the opportunity, the space to turn things down a little bit. And I imagine that's a huge factor in things like, people who suffer burnout from busy jobs and all this sort of stuff, because we all need to rest and recover, whether we're running a marathon or just looking after a house, whatever it might be. So yeah, the ability of the practice of yoga to just switch us into that slightly more restful state, I think is like absolutely invaluable. I think you mentioned Stephen Porges earlier, and there was a quote of his that's always stuck with me, which is you can't heal when you're defending. And I think the word heal is quite like loaded. But I think if you replace the word heal with the word recover, it's very hard to recover if you've got your defenses up. And I like to think that like certain aspects of the yoga practice, at least, is about like just lowering the defenses and letting your body do its thing, because our bodies know how to recover if we give them the space, for the most part.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a principle. There's an innate energy that recovers and heals, and what we do with the yoga practice or any therapies really is just to sort of allow the conditions for that to happen. And I agree with you totally. I work with a lot of people who just want to do breathing and regulate their nervous system. And what I see is people are sort of driving our culture. Our modern culture tends to tends to discourage the resting. It's for whatever reason, and plus they're distracted, so the rest becomes distraction. Either it's watch television or watch your phone, and so to be in a state of actually having some skills and tools to be able to change your state is incredibly useful. I agree.
You mentioned earlier, if I touch back on one of the first things you were talking about, teaching yoga to the Indian cricket team. I'm really interested to know how, particularly at the beginning, how was that received? Was it something that they were open to? Was it something that you had to sort of, convince people of? I know you were mentioning the fast bowler who was kind of saying like, this is not for me kind of thing. Yeah, that experience of going into what I imagine is a very driven, competitive environment, and coming in with something that's in theory maybe more restful and mindful, and how did that go?
Sure. Yeah, it was an adventure. I'll tell you what. It was. It took me way out of my comfort zone, and I knew very little about cricket actually when I went in there. I bought a big volume, and I went to the bookshop and said, "What can I buy about cricket?" And I read this volume about cricket just to have some understanding. And it was kind of 50-50. Some of the guys were very open to it. They were like, "Yeah, let's do some sessions," and then some of the guys were completely no, thank you. And it would have been nice to have, the question that happened around the sort of the boardroom table of the, in the management was, should we make it compulsory for the team to join Jim's yoga class? And they decided not to make it compulsory because, especially with the Indian team, their culture is interesting, different to other national teams in that the senior players actually call the shots, and the senior players decide what happens in the team on many levels. And so the coaches said, you know what, if we make it compulsory, there'll be a little bit of pushback. And the next time someone gets injured with a hamstring or something, they're going to blame the yoga. So so it was quite a little bit sort of sensitive, we had to sort of be easy about it. And he said, no, let's make it optional, but encourage them. And so, there were times where I was kind of having to kind of pitch myself and try and encourage the guys to come to class because, they're busy people at that level of sport. A lot of the players are, they're pretty overloaded, actually. They work hard. But I did have some of the guys, especially the younger guys, actually were more open-minded about it, I guess. But it was amazing. I got to work with some of the greats, like Sachin Tendulkar and Rahul Dravid and VVS Lakshman. I mean, amazing people, actually. I really, really respect them as humans.
And how did they do in the World Cup?
They did. They won. They won.
Oh, there you go.
Our team won. So I was with them not long before they went to the World Cup, and that year they won, which was incredible. I got to watch these guys who were friends winning the World Cup. It was fantastic.
Did you get a medal?
They had I got a jersey. I got a few signed things, but the support team is the support team. We're just kind of the background guys, but you still share in the win. I went on after that for 2 seasons. I worked in the IPL in India. So that's the Indian Premier League. I worked for the Delhi team. So for that, we fly all over India and play, cities play cities. And, that was amazing. So, compared to my earlier trip to India, where I spent 6 months and I was traveling in the mountains with sadhus and like sleeping outside. It was summer in the Himalayas. You can sleep outside months at a time. And then I traveled around India in 5-star hotels and flying everywhere. Every 3 days average, you'd be on a plane flying to somewhere else, and literally red carpets. We'd go into the hotel on a red carpet. So it's quite amazing to see the two spectrums of India. And I love India. I feel it's the most incredible country. And that's why I keep visiting there. But, amazing experience.
Yeah, I can imagine. But Jim, it's been really, really nice talking to you. I've learned a lot. It's great to hear. You've lived a very interesting life by the sounds of it. So I thought it'd be nice maybe just for us to finish. As you said, you're going to be with us for a weekend of workshops in October. If you want to give people a small little preview of what you'll be offering and what they can expect.
So the weekend we've got a workshop on breathing. I think that's Friday night, which will be just, it's sort of a mixture of a little bit of the sort of physiology, but mostly some practices. And this is just basic, good, healthy practices. And then the Friday, Saturday is my introduction to yoga for sports, which is basically bringing across some, a mixture of sort of theory and practice. So I have some sort of set little routines which are really applicable to most sports, and I go through those, teach those, and also explain why we do this and we don't do that. It doesn't go into as much depth as the longer program, but it's giving you some really good, useful tools which a sports person can use and a teacher can also use. Basically, it's like, I guess you could say, an element of it is functional movement. So I do things beyond your normal yoga and explaining and exploring how does this work as a functional movement training. There's an element of breathing work there as well, and a little bit of sort of, for teachers, tips on how to work well with people who are athletes, who are maybe not going to quite fit in with your usual yoga class. There's a lot there. It's a great fun weekend. The last couple of times in Dublin, we've had a really great time.
Yeah, we're looking forward to having you again. And as you said, you'll be hosting a retreat in Wicklow as well, and we'll share the details of that too. But it sounds like it's going to be a lovely week.
Yes, following weekend.
Well, listen, Jim, thank you very much for taking the time out of the day to come on and chat. Really enjoyed it. And we're excited to have you with us soon enough.
Thanks very much.